Hey, it's Mike here, and today, according to Joe Rogan and his guest Max Lugavere, veganism is a psyop, a cult, and virtually everybody's health fails on veganism.
I hear that all the time. Yeah, veganism is a psyop to me. It's an
ideology. It's an ideology just like any other cult.
They also say that saturated fat being bad is a psyop. Somebody found a new word, which of course stands for psychological operation. Anyway, we're going to respond to all of that and more, as well as just cover some common ground that we have. They cover some points that I completely agree with. So for the sake of peace, we'll do that. Let's go though. Really fast, the plant-based Psyop bundle, just the plant-based bundle is gonna start in a few hours. We're talking $3,700 worth of ebooks, like recipe books, workout programs, wellness content, my recent guide, Level 5 Vegan, and more, all for just $50, the average price of a latte nowadays. The link is below. Let's keep going. So this interview was a few months back, and full credit to Ryan from Happy Healthy Vegan for covering this because I would have missed it. It's been too long since I responded to Joe Rogan, who is the #1 podcast in the world, possibly the most influential single program in the world, and he often poo-poos veganism, so I gotta respond. And I will say, I have previously responded to Max Lugavere because he seems to be quite anti-vegan, makes a lot of anti-vegan points, and he had a video largely talking about how not having meat causes depression, being vegan or vegetarian. And a lot of that narrative comes from studies like this one, which on the topic of psyop in a little bit, we will go more into, but also there's just more recent studies that he seems to ignore, like this one out of Australia showing that vegans had lower depression scores and that meat eaters average slightly depressed on their depressive symptom score. And also this study showing that vegans had higher well-being rates, about twice as high as meat eaters. But yeah, let's just get to the interview. Over an hour in, Max and Joe just start spitballing about how crappy vegan is, with Max, of course, calling it a psyop.
I hear that all the time. Yeah, veganism is a psyop to me. It's
an ideology. It's
Yeah.
an ideology just like any other cult.
Now, this is a new one, which is why I wanted to respond to it. It sounds scary, and I will say it sort of plays along the lines of, oh, if it's something that I don't like, I'm going to say it's a conspiracy against me. Now, that's a trend I personally feel like I'm seeing a lot more. Anyway, what is the actual definition from Merriam-Webster? We have a couple definitions. The first one along military lines, quote, a military operation usually aimed at influencing the enemy's state of mind through non-combative means, such as the distribution of leaflets. Yeah, they dropped leaflets from planes in World War II, and I couldn't help but share this one that I found that the Nazis dropped to try and get American soldiers to surrender. The leaflet asks, will you ever hear her sweat voice again? Misspelling sweet. And a modern example of this would be Russian interference with the 2016 election through social media. This whole Nature Communication study goes more deeply into that, quite well documented. But to the second definition, quote, someone or something used by the government to influence the population's opinion and attitudes. With the example being the accusation that singer Taylor Swift is a government psyop. So in this case, really any plan by the government to influence the way that people are thinking. And I would say you could even expand this definition to just any large organization trying to influence public thought. But along those lines of everything that you don't like has to be a conspiracy nowadays, I think it's fair to say that there are just forces working on both sides of essentially any issue. So the question becomes, to what degree is that group working against the public interest, working against you, and actually changing things for the worst? And also the actual impact of a given psyop operation, if you want to call it that, also heavily depends on the amount of resources that the group has. And this is where I have to say, just like flip the script a little bit and be like, hey, the meat industry fits this definition better than vegans do. Just in terms of being a large organization, even governmentally connected, that is trying to change the public's opinion. There's a good case. I mean, simple example, we have the Masters of Beef advocacy that started somewhat recently. Another example, going back to that popular study about how vegetarians are more depressed, which led to a huge news cycle in things like the Daily Mail. Well, first of all, that wasn't on vegans specifically and was used against vegans, but more importantly, it was funded by the beef Checkoff. And again, Checkoffs are government organizations, and in this case, it's an organization that takes some of the money, some of the gains from the beef industry, and then uses that in part to try and change public opinion, in this case to try and prevent people from quitting eating meat based off the fact that they might get depressed. They make that study, they send it off to the Daily Mail, etc., creates a whole news cycle, changes public opinion, psychology. So in that sense, we have this $1.5 trillion global meat industry. And then we have vegans, especially when you're just talking about ethical vegans who follow veganism as a lifestyle. We're talking about the actual rebels here. They are a minority. They don't have a ton of money. You know, vegans often have like small activist hubs that are grassroots. Like I was just at Wishbone in Toronto, which has like hand-painted art all over the wall, and they're just trying to frickin' save some animals. But in contrast to that, a Joe who thinks he's the rebel is actually with the establishment here, with the lion's share of the resources and influence, selling Butcher Box in the past, etc. I almost forgot that Max has also sold Butcher Box. Is this episode a meat psyop? And they do mention Bill Gates in passing here, and I think it sort of fits into the whole thing of like, oh, billionaires are trying to take away our meat and replace everything with like plants.
This idea that a steak is delicious, but it's ultimately bad for you. We should consume less meat. Bill Gates saying it with a big pot belly.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus Christ.
And first off, I will say one billionaire like Bill Gates is a proponent of plant-based foods. Virtually all other billionaires eat meat. Makes sense. They're completely insatiable. But in this case, Bill Gates also does, saying that cheeseburgers are his favorite food. And when Bill Gates is asking people to eat less meat with his pot belly, he's doing it from an environmental perspective. You know, looking at the results of studies like this one, where we have 70% lower greenhouse gas emissions from a vegan diet, like it's pretty obvious that's a good thing to do if you care about the planet. But they continue along the lines of like becoming a blind vegan cult follower.
And once you become a part of that, you lose all objectivity, and you're no longer willing to talk about these things in a rational way. You're defending your religion.
I think it's fair to say that everybody, no matter what their belief system is, has a filter on their perception. That's like what it is to be human. We all have biases and we're all wrong, regardless of what diet, lifestyle, etc. in some cases. But when it comes to veganism, which is an ethical stance to reduce animal harm, vegans are clearly on the right track there in terms of their animal input and working to change supply and demand so less animals are bred and killed to be eaten. And then also get that added bonus of having lower disease rates when eating a vegan diet pattern, talking lower cancer, lower diabetes, lower heart disease, etc. Just because we don't buy those ridiculous arguments that Joe Rogan has made in the past about crop deaths and plant sentience, that doesn't mean that we've lost all objectivity. And I wanted to mention a couple health points because we're about to get into the health stuff here. Joe Rogan apparently thinks that all vegans just have bad blood work, essentially.
Everybody that I know that tries to eat only vegetables winds up feeling like shit. And there's only a few exceptions to that. And again, there's no one-size-fits-all diet. But the people that I know that have gone into a vegan diet, almost all of them get bad blood work.
I'll just say right now, Ryan from Happy Healthy Vegan made a great point of him and other vegans like me sharing their blood work quite a bit online. I should do it again. I've just been feeling good and too lazy to get my blood work done. But Joe Rogan, on the other hand, never shows his numbers, and we can pretty much guess that his LDL is way too high.
I'm just completely skeptical of his claim here. Like, really, in Joe's inner circle, he really hangs out with a bunch of vegans and plant-based eating people. I highly doubt it. But the fact of the matter remains that Joe has never once, as far as I can tell, and I tell you, I've been doing videos about this guy for quite a long time, I've never seen him once release a blood lab.
And I don't know what vegans he's talking about. Yeah, he's had some ex-vegans on their ex-vegan tours, like Miley Cyrus, come through. I don't even think she mentioned blood work, though. But then, more recently, study after study after study has been showing that vegans are doing amazing in terms of blood work. The B12 levels are great. In some cases, even trending better than meat eaters for advanced blood markers, as well as good vitamin D levels, and of course, those great LDL or bad cholesterol levels. And just the claim that vegans have bad blood work is ridiculous when you consider that the average meat eater's blood work is trash. Like, they have LDL levels that are likely going to cause atherosclerosis.
Oh, yeah.
And they try to figure out what's wrong, and then many of them try to supplement, and then one day they'll have a piece of salmon and feel like their body just returned on, and then they go, oh, okay, I got to stop doing this.
Yeah, because that's biochemically possible. Just one piece of salmon and your life is just forever changed. And that probably is a reflection of Miley Cyrus coming on. Claiming to not be getting enough long-chain omegas when fish get them from algae anyway, which is frustrating. She also clearly was just making larger lifestyle changes from her previously like drug-laden and processed food bar-based, like nightlife-based diet. But I think it's really interesting that Joe latches onto anecdotes about vegans having bad blood work, ignores the meat eaters having bad blood work, ignores the incredible other anecdotes of people on a plant-based diet reversing diseases to an insane degree, as well as the actual studies on diseases. But Joe, you never have those people on your show, which you could say demonstrates that
You're no longer willing to talk about these things in a rational way. You're defending your religion.
Anyway, Matt goes on to make some claims about saturated fat and heart disease.
Saturated fat still continues to be demonized, right? But only 3% of the saturated fat that your average American ingests comes from steak, comes from meat.
You know when you hear a claim and an alarm bell just goes off in your head? This is one of those, and I'm like, I just got to fact check him. Because a lot of times, people making claims on Joe Rogan are wrong, and by a lot of times, I mean virtually all times. Just to pop the first study I found on this topic from 2013, just looking at different foods and what percent of total saturated fat intake they are, we can see that he's wrong right off the bat, that beef is over twice as high as he said at about 8.5%. Add other meat, he did say meat in general, with processed meat, another 6.9%, poultry, another 4.2%. And so you're getting up to a share of about 20% of saturated fat being from meat. He's off by a factor of 6, and it is the case from certain studies that meat-based saturated fat on a gram per gram basis raises LDL more so than dairy or plant-based saturated fat. But even then, I would add that saturated fat from butter raises LDL more than plant saturated fats like coconut oil, as this study found. So it's a spectrum, but he continues.
If you were just to accept that saturated fat is the worst dietary nutrient one might ingest.
By the way, that's a psyop.
Yeah.
Literally from the sugar company.
Yep, he calls this a psyop from the sugar industry. And I think this is so interesting, again, how quick he is to call things on the opposite side a psyop. Yes, it is the case that the sugar industry seems to have not disclosed their interest on a study in the 70s where they contributed about $50,000 adjusted for inflation today, which is obviously dwarfed by the absurd amount that the dairy and beef industry has spent on research with the same goal, really, to just make another industry look like it's causing a disease that your industry is probably contributing to. The National Dairy Council has funded a ton of studies, but PSYOP, I'm just hearing crickets in that direction.
Are we talking about saturated fat in dairy? Because that seems to have no negative cardiovascular impact, right?
And yeah, in terms of butter, which is essentially the most pure source of saturated fat from dairy, we did have that whole butter is back claim. One example, which got a lot of news coverage, was that Siri Torino study, which was, funded by the National Dairy Council. But that was debunked by sources like Harvard saying, nope, saturated fat from dairy is still a concern. We also have this large study on 500,000 people, which found that each tablespoon of butter was associated with a 7% increased risk of all-cause mortality, which goes up to 8% per tablespoon for cardiovascular mortality. And there are countless studies that just show that eating butter raises LDL, that bad cholesterol. And an interesting study I haven't mentioned in a while, it would be unethical to repeat today, but we have studies that took people in mental hospitals, put them on a controlled feeding trial, and even crossed over what their diets were. They put them on a low saturated fat diet. And during the periods that they put them on a low saturated fat diet, the occurrence of heart-related deaths went down by half.
When I tell people that I eat mostly meat, they're like, "What about your cholesterol?" I'm like, it's like to try to walk them down the rabbit hole of good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, a balance of cholesterol.
And then, of course, the best data that we have, Mendelian randomized studies, which use genetic information to parse out causality, show over and over again that LDL is causal to atherosclerosis. But for a couple last points from them, I wanted to look at a couple things that we agree on here, which was just a little bit refreshing here. Is Max talking about kale?
I mean, take kale. Kale is the top source of these carotenoids called lutein and zeaxanthin, which we know directly support eye health and brain health. And so I don't see a reason to deprive myself of these greens that I know have these compounds that literally migrate up to the brain, where they help to reduce oxidative stress. They might even improve the way, cognitive function and the like.
Did I just hear somebody mention kale without immediately talking about how you're going to get goiters and die immediately. Like, they're so close to understanding why a vegan diet is healthier. And Joe actually chimes in with a pro-plant point, despite Joe, of course, eating a largely meat-based diet.
I think the arguments against eating those, to me, always are like some of the silliest, is that plants are producing these chemicals to avoid predation.
Yeah.
And that these phytochemicals are bad for you. Like, Jesus Christ, in a world today where there's so much that's bad for you, to concentrate on salad
Yeah.
seems f***ing crazy. I don't think anybody's dying from salad.
I'm happy that he's rejecting this argument that I'm seeing from carnivores constantly, but, you know, he did have Paul Saladino on, who made that argument over and over again in different ways, and his response was not that. It was kind of like, oh, cool, yeah, Paul Saladino. But yeah, despite me giving them a hard time, I'm happy that we agree on something, those points about plants being healthy. Anyway, in the end, is vegan a psyop? You'll have to decide for yourself. No, it's clear that psyop is just a term for something that you don't like, an organization that you don't like, working toward changing some public opinion, toward doing what they obviously are going to do. Any organization is going to be trying to further the public interest in their direction. That's just how it works. But again, which one is more likely to be the psyop that is damaging you or public health in general? Is it going to be the $1.5 trillion meat industry, or is it going to be some relatively small vegan food companies, as well as little rebel vegan activist hubs around with, again, their hand-painted signs? So I would argue that it's a stronger case that the beef and dairy industries are psyops than veganism itself. And ironically, that recent beef industry funded study, which was trying to show that plant protein is inferior to beef, showed that it wasn't, so that they were equal because it had that NIH funding, probably. I have a whole video on that recently. And yeah, once again, if you want to check out that plant-based bundle that's worth nearly $4,000 for just $50, you can just click the link below, check out all of those ebooks, recipe books, workout regimens, my ebook, etc. And if in the end it is a psyop that ultimately results in killing billions of less animals, then sign me up. And let me know down below what you thought about Max and Joe's conversation, and feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.